What are some of the most common misconceptions about metastatic breast cancer in young women?
I think the first one is that we don't get it. We're not supposed to get breast cancer, to begin with, and that, it's not as bad when we get it, even though it's the same type of metastatic breast cancer is metastatic breast cancer, whether you're young or old. But for some reason, we're supposed to be going into it healthier. I've had people tell me that, well, you're otherwise healthy, so I'm sure you'll be able to beat this. But that's just not the case. And, sometimes it's worse because it's such a shock to the system with treatment. And it's just, yeah, it's just, people tell me I look healthy, and I try to tell them I look, I'm sicker now than I was when I looked sick.
There's a part of us that, there's some of us who just look really well, but are sicker than we look. But I would say this notion that we are at death's door is probably one of the biggest misconceptions.
I think there's very little public awareness about what being metastatic means in any cancer, but particularly for young women, it is this disbelief. Well, how could this happen? What we hear from at Living Beyond Breast Cancer from some of the young women we're involved in is that people, they hear it, but they don't believe it, and they'll say, oh, well, I hope you get better soon, and be totally inappropriate and not understand what the disease is. So that feeds into the isolation and misunderstanding.
What are some of the particular challenges facing young women with breast cancer today?
Isolation has been mentioned before, and I would say that's one of the biggest ones. It's already isolating enough to have breast cancer as a young woman, but then when you are metastatic in a young woman, you don't usually have any peers that are going through that, and it's just very isolating, very lonely, and I think important to connect with others.
Well, I think all of us living with breast cancer face challenges relating to family, to career, to dating, finances. I think when you're living with metastatic breast cancer, a lot of those issues are heightened in some way. There's a sense of urgency, a timing, a sense of hopelessness that sometimes sets in. And so, what are you going to tell your children if you have children about your illness? When do you disclose to someone that you're dating or in a relationship with that you're living with a chronic illness? How are you going to handle the finances that can become overwhelming when you're dealing with scan after scan and very expensive treatments? And, how do you move forward in your career, for example, when, you need to take time off to recuperate from treatment or for the appointments that are inevitable? So I think, we have a lot of the same concerns as women living with earlier stage cancers, but in some ways the concerns are exacerbated, heightened, and much more time specific.
Well, just for me, one of the challenges I face is just having people understand. I have very close friends, but still sometimes it's really hard for them to understand how sick I really am. And it can get very frustrating because you don't want to have to explain it over and over and over again. And sometimes you just can't verbalize how you're feeling. And so, they ask how I am, and I just say, okay, when I really have so much more to say. So it's just having people understand what it's like is very challenging.
I come from a different perspective as how much harder it is to take care of younger women with metastatic breast cancer than older, because you know the investment, you know that the longevity issue is an enormous issue, because these women have so much else going on in their lives, and our goal is to let people be as normal as possible for as long as possible. So there is an added pressure when we're taking care of younger women.
As the population of cancer survivors grows, how will this affect the community of young women affected by metastatic breast cancer?
Well, hopefully the opportunity to connect will be there. All of our organizations are working towards connecting young women and reducing that isolation and educating caregivers and others about what their unique challenges are. So there's that. And then it's just, how will younger women fare, because they will be living, hopefully, with metastatic disease longer than before. So what are the life challenges? Financial concerns are huge. It was touched upon by Rochelle. Their careers are interrupted. You know, some are, depending on their age, have to go back and live with their parents. You know, so there are a lot of psychosocial issues that, you know, we are trying to understand better. So hopefully we will.
I think that the notion of being a cancer survivor can get complicated in the context of metastatic breast cancer because a lot of us don't necessarily see ourselves as survivors. Yet the population of survivors is going to grow tremendously, you know, within the next 20 years. And so I think it's going to become really important for the metastatic breast cancer community, and particularly young women, to sort of figure out where we are in the context of survivorship. You know, we are still living with our disease. We are in some ways a survivor of our diagnosis. And so we're going to need to get together to carve out a comfortable space for ourselves in the context of survivorship issues, which are getting a lot of research dollars and a lot of research attention. So I think it's in our best interest to figure out where we are in the context of survivorship and how we can take advantage of the research and attention that's being focused on survivorship.